Does your engine shut off randomly? Does it seem to shut off whenever it gets hot? If so, you just might have a bad ignition coil. The ignition coil, along with the flywheel, create the electric charge for the spark plug. An ignition coil that's going bad can cause all sorts of different problems, from the engine simply not starting to random or sporadic ignition failures. Ignition coils don't fail very often, and many of the symptoms related to a bad ignition coil can also be caused by other engine components. So it's important to thoroughly test the coil and the other engine components when making a diagnosis. The most common mistake when diagnosing an ignition coil is to test it by simply removing the spark plug and grounding the plug to the engine to test for spark. The spark plug operates in a pressurized environment inside the cylinder, much different from the ambient air outside. To recreate what happens inside of the cylinder, you will need to use a spark tester. A spark tester with an adjustable gap is best, as it will allow you to stress the coil by increasing the width of the gap, which forces the coil to create more power to jump it. Replacing an ignition coil is a more challenging repair, but it is a repair that you can do yourself, and I'm going to show you how.
Hi, I'm Mark Socha.
Do-it-yourself repairs like these are easier than you might think. From lawn machines to cordless drills, kitchen mixers,
Outdoor grills.
our how-to videos walk you through each repair from start to finish. So doing it yourself means never having to do it alone.
Let's get started.
We'll begin by removing the rear motor cover. Next, I'll remove the shaft and handle assembly from the motor. Next, I'll remove the clutch drum. If I try to rotate the screw that secures the clutch drum, it'll just rotate the entire engine. So what I need to do is keep the piston from rotating. And to do that, I'll remove the spark plug and insert a piece of rope to bind up the piston in the cylinder. The rope will take up the gap between the piston and the top of the cylinder, so there's no room for it to move. With the piston bound, now I can unscrew the clutch drum screw. Now remove the clutch plates. They're threaded onto the spindle. Usually you can remove them by placing a screwdriver out on the groove on the edge and striking with a hammer. And I'll repeat the process with the second ring. Now remove the 4 screws that secure the housing and starter assembly to the rest of the motor. Now I can remove the ignition coil. I'll start by removing this wire and then the 2 screws that secure the coil to the rest of the engine. Now I can install the new ignition coil. The ignition coil needs to line up with the magnets on the flywheel. There needs to be a slight air gap between the coil and the magnets. In this case, that gap should be 0.35 millimeters. To set the gap, I'm going to use an ignition coil gapping tool. You could also use 1 or 2 business cards, as long as the gap is about 0.35 millimeters. I place the tool between the magnets and the ignition coil. The gapping tool will keep the air gap consistent as I tighten the ignition coil back to the engine. Now just make sure the coil is firmly against the magnets on the flywheel with the gapping tool in place and tighten down both screws. I'll remove the gapping tool, give the flywheel a spin to make sure everything clears, and then reinstall the ignition wire. Now I can place the starter housing assembly back onto the engine. And I'll go ahead and secure it with the screws. This top screw on the carburetor side also secures the throttle cable. So I want to make sure I get that back in place. Now I can go ahead and reassemble the clutch assembly. I'll start with the large washer, followed by the clutch rings. You'll notice on each clutch ring there's an indent on one side, and that should face out or towards the shaft. Rotate these in place. They don't need to be super tight. They'll actually tighten themselves as you use the trimmer. But I will tighten them up as much as I can. And now the clutch drum. Now I can remove the rope from the cylinder and reinstall the spark plug. Now I'll reattach the throttle cable. Now reassemble the shaft assembly to the engine. This plate goes in between the two assemblies. Now I'll thread the engine into the shaft and make sure that the shaft aligns with the clutch drum on the engine. Once in place, I'll secure it with the screws. Now realign the fuel tank with the front bumpers and reinstall the rear cover. Be sure to check back often for new videos and expert advice. If you found this video helpful, give us a thumbs up
And leave a comment.